The accounts I'm going to talk about are enormously powerful. This is a 64-year-old man following surgery. He seemed to be traveling on a train with passengers wearing black veils. The three categories we found were the void, afraid of the light, and the hellish. These can blow apart everything a person believes about life. A woman in childbirth was in a total vacuum, naked, with nothing to see or do for eternity. This is a man in his late 40s. He felt himself surrounded by demons. One man said, when my mother-in-law came to consciousness, she had the most terrified look I'd ever seen. The most terrifying experience can have the same kinds of effects long range that a glorious NDE.
The A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast.
We're here with Nancy Evans Bush. She is one of the pioneer NDE researchers specialized in distressing NDEs, also known as disturbing NDEs or hellish NDEs. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you, AJ.
You said that you had some cases that you mentioned in your book, right?
The book was titled Dancing Past the Dark. It's the first, actually the only really comprehensive book about near-death experiences, but particularly distressing ones. And the accounts I'm going to talk about today are taken from the book because they're the ones for whom the experiencers have given me permission to speak publicly about them. Here's an example. This is a 64-year-old man with an infection following surgery for an aneurysm. At first, he felt motion and seemed to be traveling on a train. In a minute, I'll get to his voice. So he thinks he's on a train nearly filled with passengers. They were wearing black hats with black veils, which covered their faces. He could not see their faces. The train made several stops, and at each stop, some passengers got off. And finally, he realized he was the only passenger remaining on the train. And these now are his words. I was now in the last row of the train, alone. The train started with an awful jerk and stopped short, and I was jerked from my seat and tossed in the air away from the train. As I looked under me, the train was melting. A strong wind was pulling me into what seemed to be a funnel shape, like a cornucopia, only opened at both ends. I was flying and drawn directly into the vortex or funnel. At the end, the lights were blinding and crystal flashing. It was unbearable. As I neared the very end, I reached for the sides, trying to stop myself from falling off the end into the funnel, into the flashing crystal. I felt that I did not want to go on. If there were some way I could explain to you what happened, I vividly remember screaming, "God, please help me. I'm not ready." As I write this letter, I am reliving it. I remember that when I screamed, an arm shot out of the sky and grabbed my hand. And at the last second, I was kept from falling into the funnel. The lights flashing and the heat was really something. There is an experience in which the light is not welcoming. A 30-year-old said, I felt I was being tricked into death. In my mind, I was fighting with faces unknown to me. And I felt I had to have all my wits about me to keep from dying. That's a 30-year-old. Then there's a middle-aged Illinois housewife who says, I would see huge things coming toward me, like animals with baseball bats. Then I'd be in this blue-green water, and out in front of me was this huge white marble-like rock. At the top of the rock was this bright light. And as I got closer to the rock, I saw an image of a person standing on top of it in white clothing, like a robe, maybe. But I couldn't tell if it was male or female. I couldn't see the face at all. And that's all she said. It's hard sometimes to say, what's the big deal with this kind of experience? That didn't sound like much. But if you're the one who's been yanked out of your body and you're flying through space and things are flying around you, it's a whole different scenario. The prime near-death researcher, medical researcher for 50 years has been Bruce Greyson. Started at University of Michigan, that went to Connecticut, and for years was at the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies. He's now retired. About 40 years ago, he and I put together the first study of distressing or otherwise known as negative experiences. We tried to steer away from negative because that felt like a downer. And what we discovered was that even the most terrifying experience can have the same kinds of effects long range that a glorious NDE can have. You don't have to get to heaven to have peace of mind, unconditional love, and a life of service. So that was one of our findings. We also discovered that the distressing experiences are the least common type. Maybe 1 in 5 NDEs has some kind of disturbing qualities, not necessarily hellish, as you will see. We found 3 basic types. The 3 categories we found were the void, afraid of the light, and the hellish. But then there are all these other types which don't fit neatly into any of those boxes, or maybe they overlap a couple of boxes. There's a pre-law student who told of his experience in an auto accident. My first thought was, I must be dead. This is what death must be. But it certainly wasn't blissful. Just nothingness. I felt like a piece of protoplasm floating out on the sea. I thought, maybe I'm lost. Maybe I'm not going to heaven. But as the hours went on, with absolute no sensation, there was no pain, but there was no hot, no cold, no light, no taste, no smell, no sensation whatsoever. None, other than the fact that I felt a slight sensation of movement, of traveling at extremely fast speed. And I knew I was leaving the earth and everything else, all of the physical world. And at that point, it became unbearable. It became horrific. As time goes on, when you have no feeling, no sensation, no sense of light, I started to panic and struggle and pray and everything I could think of to struggle to get back. And I communicated with a sister of mine who passed away. And at that moment, I went back into my body, and my body had been moved to the hospital. From my going on 50 years of working with these kinds of experiences, I think this is the thing we need to remember. These are enormously powerful and can blow apart everything a person believes about life. Here's another one. This is a woman in childbirth. I was to be suspended in a total vacuum with nothing to see or do for eternity. I was naked, and I was sad about that because I thought, if only I had clothing, I could pull the threads and knot them or reeve them for something to do. And if only I were sitting in a chair, I could splinter it and try to make something of the splinters. But there's nothing and nothing to do. And then the overwhelming realization that eternity was forever and ever, time without end. What to do in a vacuum forever? After all these years, she concluded, the nightmare remains vivid in my mind. I assure you, the worst form of hell in my mind would be myself suspended naked in a vacuum. The surprising thing about most distressing experiences is that they are not visual. They are internal. They are terrifying, but it's the spirit that is frightened, not the body. The effect of these experiences is to blow apart the person's previous worldview. Their whole sense of reality just goes all at once. And they come back to consciousness, having to rebuild a sense of how the world works, how they work, what is their part in it. It all has to be rebuilt. I'll give you a taste of a couple of brief glimpses of hell-like experience. In 1980, George Gallup of the Gallup poll did a study of near-death experiences. And they discovered, they interviewed some 1,400 people, and of the near-death experiencers, they discovered that 1% of all the people they interviewed had had a hellish experience. That 1% is not 1% of all experiences. That's 1% of distressing experiences are hellish. They found 28%, roughly 28% of their sample had some negative aspect, but only 1% conformed to the Western traditional view of hell. One man said, when my mother-in-law came to consciousness after her heart attack, she had the most terrified look I'd ever seen. And she said to me, I've just seen Dante's Inferno. That was all. She wouldn't say any more. Typical. People with deeply disturbing NDEs do not want to talk about it, and they may not for years. Here's another one. After he was able to speak, my brother-in-law said he felt himself slipping down some stairs and down in blackness and scared and a deep fear. He got to bottom and saw some very large rusty doors with a rusty lock and chain, and people sitting outside on benches. He was afraid of what he saw. He was in a panic. He knew he was at the very doors of hell. And with great effort, he turned and climbed back up those stairs to the outside world and realized they were working on him to get a heartbeat. Another one. Hell is a pit, and there is darkness, but there is also fire. I was in a place to which the Bible refers as outer darkness, and it's not pretty. After my experience, I could not talk about it. I didn't want people to know that I had gone to hell. That is so typical. I would comment about this particular experience. Her description of the beings sounds very much like the way people who report UFO abductions describe the beings. They're usually described as tall and skinny and weird looking or scary looking, often green. They often look like praying mantises, and her experience of being in a cave, it's interesting. She's in an enclosed space, just interesting similarities. I just throw that in there too. I'll read one more. This is a man in his late 40s who felt he was a failure. He had been saving money to take his family on vacation, but he wanted a nice vacation and he didn't have enough money. So he went gambling and he lost all of the money. So he is attempting suicide because he could not bring himself to tell his family that he had gambled away their vacation. And he wrote, "From the roof of the utility shed in my backyard, I jumped to the ground. Luckily for me, I had forgot the broken lawn chair that lay near the shed. My feet hit the chair and broke my fall, or my neck would have been broken. I hung in the rope and strangled. I was outside my physical body. I saw my body hanging in the rope. It looked awful. I was terrified. I could see and hear, but different, hard to explain. Demons were all around me. I could hear them, but could not see them. They chattered like blackbirds. It's as if they knew they had me and had all eternity to drag me down into hell to torment me. It would have been the worst kind of hell, trapped hopeless between two worlds, wandering, lost and confused. I had to get back into my body. Oh my God, I needed help. I ran to the house, went in through the door without opening, and mind you, he is still hanging. But he says, I ran into the house, went in through the door without opening it, cried out to my wife, but she couldn't hear me. So I went right into her body. I could see and hear with her eyes and ears. I made contact with her and heard her say, "Oh my God." She grabbed a knife from the kitchen and ran out to where I was hanging and got up on the old chair and cut me down. She could find no pulse. She was a nurse. When the emergency squad got to me, my heart had stopped. My breath was gone. And that's all he says. He felt himself surrounded by demons chattering like blackbirds, they're going to take him for hell for all eternity. So now he has not only his disappointed family, but demons to deal with. But there's no description of lakes of fire. We've heard one mention of fire in all of any of these I've read. I have read very few descriptions of lakes of fire. If people describe one, it's way off in the distance someplace. The hellish experiences have strange landscapes, but instead of lakes of fire, they're more apt to be deserts or lonely forests with bare trees, nothing much growing. People, as you've heard, people may hear moans and groans, which they interpret as people being tormented. But I rarely see a description that they're seeing people being tormented. If they see other people, they're usually just wandering around, kind of homeless. Not any of the descriptions that we expect. In 50 years, I have heard one rumor. I've never seen or heard the experience myself. One rumor about a person seeing a man in a red patent leather suit that they took to be Satan. That's the rumor of such a sighting. Where does that leave us?
Do you want to mention something about your book?
It covers such a range that it's not just about my experience, it's minimally about my experience. It's about numinous experiences. It covers a vast amount of territory, but it's a very readable book. I write for real people with real questions, and I hope to give them some real answers. Famous novelist. She wrote horror novels, died 6 years ago, 7 years ago. Anne Rice wrote a blog post about reading Dancing Past the Dark and said to her readers, whatever you think you know about NDEs, read this book. But she went on at some length describing how excited she was to find it. Unfortunately, I did not know about her blog post until 6 years after she died, when somebody sent me a copy. So I was never able to be in touch with her to thank her. But it gave me great confidence to know that an author of her stature and background would say such large things about my book.
Does each person somehow co-create the details of the experience based on the content in their unconscious?
I think there's a very strong argument to be made that we are dipping into what psychiatrist Carl Jung called the collective unconscious, that all of human unconsciousness is like a gigantic ocean into which we can dip and probably not intentionally pull out certain types of experiences. It is not to say, and this is an important point, it's not that these are imagination the way it would be if we just make up a story. I've said this probably 1,000,000 times in my career. Stories are the baskets in which we carry our meanings. All of these accounts are people's stories about an experience. The story is the basket that carries their interpretation of the meaning of the experience. This is how we navigate our lives, by our stories. Our lives are made up of the stories in them. And stories of this kind that are not made up, numinous experiences of the holy, the supernatural, the spiritual, what have you. Numinous experiences are not under our direct conscious control. They come from a part of our unconscious that is not in our control, but that kind of a borderline area, if it has area, which of course it doesn't. But this is called not the imagination itself, but imaginal. And that's an important difference, to say that an account or a story is out of our control, but its numinous is to say it comes from the imaginal capability. So these are not made up stories. They're all different because the people are all different and their backgrounds are all different. So the stories may follow roughly similar patterns, but I keep seeing online comments from people saying they're really distressed that experiencers keep saying different things. Why are they describing different places? Well, if I'm a traveler and I'm going, say, to Salt Lake City, I can get there any number of ways on different roads that will show me different things and different scenes, and I will meet different people. So the destination is whatever, an understanding of consciousness. But we get there by our own roots. Near-death experiences And other numinous experiences are not just the skin of the stories. The important thing is the meanings that people take from them. And if you take meanings that are nourishing and helpful, it's going to be a lot of work. Trust me, it's a lot of work. But to begin to get a sense of how we work, how our consciousness operates, how the universe works, all of these things come together with psychology and psychiatry and biology and quantum physics and near-death experience groups and religious denominations, all in the same universe, all trying to find an explanation that seems to them to make sense and that they can live by. And from my perspective, this has been the most fascinating possible 50 years, even though there are still folks who think I must be really a very negative person, because otherwise, why would I have stuck with the distressing experiences for so long? Why? Because I'm curious, and they're the ones who needed the attention. And because I needed the attention.
This has been the A.J. Parr Spiritual Journalist Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.